Hey there, horse racers. Welcome to this discussion portion of the Brony Historian, where I will be joined with the most famous and strong writer in the Brony fandom, at least in my opinion. And we have a younger dude, Cashflow, who joined the fandom a bit more recently and at a much earlier point in his life. So we have two veterans here, with myself joining in July 2011. When did you join Shakespearicles?
I've been in the fandom since the very beginning. I was in the 4chan wars in October 2010
All
when they
right.
first. So, yeah.
Yeah, that'll be cool. Be good to get some insight on that very earliest point. And what about you, Cashflow?
I'd say I joined right around 2013. I was give or take about 14 myself at the time, and
And you were
well,
basically in the target audience then, weren't you? Just
not
about.
necessarily. I was 14 and a guy. I'd say the target audience at the time was little girls and children. So I'd say I was decently above and out of the target audience range actually.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was 24 in 2011 when it started. I was already one of the older ones in the community, in my local community at the time. And yeah, it's absolutely crazy to think that it's been 14 years, because we're totally recording this on the 10th of October, the 14-year anniversary of Generation 4 of My Little Pony. And yeah, it's pretty crazy to think that it's been that long since this whole insane fandom started.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. It's kind of surreal to be this far along. I mean, me
Yeah.
having in this, especially in this case, me having been the last one to join, now having it be over 10 years for myself, but over 14 years in since the inception of Pony. And we're literally coming up on that anniversary at this point. So it's about to be 14 years. It's to me it's something surreal, and I never really envisioned what it would be like once we got here. That'd be the best way to describe it for me.
Yeah. How do you feel about it, Shake? Being having been that long and that you're that much older.
I kind of feel like there's that one scene in Rick and Morty where Morty plays Roy for the first time and he lives his whole life. And then
Yeah.
Rick kind of judges his life looking back on it and says, "Oh, you kind of wasted your 40s on your bird watching phase." And for me, Pony has taken up the entirety of my 30s.
Right. Yep. And for me, it's been nearly the entirety of my 20s and 30s, because yeah, I'm getting close to the end of my 30s now. So that's
And
pretty insane.
for me, I gotta ask you guys, what has kept you, like, for example, coming back to this fandom as opposed to any of the others you may have been in or may have partook? What's so specific about Pony, or what's so special about Pony that you guys feel, it's something you like coming back to, something you guys want to come back to? Because I mean, having gone through it myself, the last 10 years, in a sense, I've gone through it. That was half of my teenage years, good amount of my formative years, and now moving into my 20s. And while I may not be actively watching the show or actively participating in the fandom as much as I also have participated more than I have in the last, say, 10 years. Or let me rephrase that. In the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years, I've participated more in these last two than any other time that I had. Even when I was really into the fandom, I never went to conventions or anything along those lines. And now I try to make it a point to go. Now that I have friends that go, now that I have more connections with people that are there, I try to make it a point to go. I have fun with it. So I
Mm.
gotta ask for you guys, what is it about ponies that makes you come back to it? That makes you wanna, that makes it fine with you guys being like, you know what, this is what I love as my hobby. This is what I want my 30s to be about. This is what my 20s to be about, etc. However it may be. What is it for you guys?
Well, for me,
So
I'd say, for me, basically, the start of Pony was basically the start of my social life, because before then I was pretty ostracized, and I was the bullied nerd in school, and I didn't really have many friends. I only had a couple of really close friends, and basically, yeah, it wasn't until I was 24 that I actually got out of my completely online life and only having online friends. Um, the Brony meetups was the first opportunity I actually had to go out and meet people and actually be one of the cool kids, not the the one that was picked on and all that at school. So it was basically the start of actually having a social life where I was considered an equal peer to the other people that I was hanging out with.
All right, all right. And for yourself, Shakes?
So I have a pretty typical answer as far as what keeps me here, because a lot of people will say when posed this question, they say, I came for the show, but I stayed for the fandom. I stayed for the community. I liked writing fan fiction about the show, but if nobody wanted to engage with that fan fiction, then I wouldn't have kept doing it. And I don't know if I would have necessarily fallen out of love with the show, but I probably wouldn't have been as active in the community anymore. Um, and the thing is that I think that the Brony fandom had been the kind of the melting pot springboard for a lot of really lasting friendships. I mean, in my server where I hang out with a lot of my friends, like, yeah, My Little Pony is still a prominent aspect of that server, but it's not everything. There's plenty of other things that we do, and it's created a lot of lasting friendships as a result of it. And that keeps me engaged with the community, keeps me engaged with fan fiction, it keeps me writing.
Yep.
And I
Yeah, I'd
would
say
actually
it's
have to
it's very much all the people that I've met and the people that I continue to hang out with. And Anyway, you go, Cash, I'm thinking.
yeah, no, for sure. But that's actually, I'd have to say that's part of what kept me, let's say, got me back into the community. And I remember actually part of it was, meeting a few people at the convention. Actually, I remember meeting you, Shakes, you and Scarlet Ribbon, so a mutual friend of ours that we had. We met at BabsCon, and that was something that for me it wasn't something that I expected at all. It wasn't. I had read your work in the past, and I thought, oh, pretty cool. I saw you with the shirt, and I was like, no way. And I was like, oh, way, cool. That's pretty awesome. And
And
it
similar
was
to cash flow, Pony was my introduction to my very first convention experience, because I had known that Comic Con and other things like that, like E3, those existed, but I never went to them.
right,
And
right.
BronyCon 2012 was the first convention I ever went to, and I've gone to many since.
Yeah, for me, like I didn't go to a Brony Con until a while in, but I remember that it was when I was with the Brony fan and was the first time I went to a convention with actual friends to go with. Like previously I'd just kind of gone to a convention and kind of just, milled about in the crowd and didn't really have anyone, to talk to or anything like that. But yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I went to my first supernova after I became a Brony and had all these people that I was hanging out with, and that was the first time I actually like went with a group of friends. And
And I
yeah, like at the start of the fandom, there was, well, I mean, I think I should get into that story more in like the next episode when we're talking about 2011. I'll save it for then, talking about my early cons and stuff.
Fair enough, fair enough. But I have to agree with you guys both. This is, I say, for me, it's almost like a renaissance of a second revival for me, in the sense that I really did kind of fall out of Pony. I was very inactive. I still had every once in a while there was fiction that I was watching, or fiction that I was reading and keeping up with, but it was just fan fiction. That's all it was at the end of the day. Just a few different stories here and there that I found interesting, but nothing very active. And when I did make some friends at the convention, I remember even because at the time it was 2023, I had just moved up to the Bay Area for myself in California, and this was the first chance I had to go to a convention in an area not just that I lived, but without the input of my family being around to say, well, it's probably not a good idea. And then I actually ran into a few hiccups at the time. I ran into a few hiccups with wanting to go, and I ended up having to tell my family at the end of it. And even though they gave me that small pushback that I was expecting, they also helped me find workarounds to the issue that I was facing for why I couldn't go. So for me, that really was instrumental in starting my first year with Babs. And actually, that was the first year that I met the group, your group, Shakes. that was the first year that I met y'all. And if I don't know if you remember, but that was the year I also went to, I think, 2 or 3 other conventions at the time. It was Winnie City PonyCon and then Everfree Northwest. And I gotta say, now having had those experiences, now having gone and had those times, it's something that I would do it again in a heartbeat. I absolutely loved it. It was so amazing, and it was something that I never really expected myself to fall into because, like you, I knew about Comic Con, I knew about all these different anime expos and things along those lines, but I never had a reason to go to one. I never felt so strongly about something that I was like, well, I'll spend the money and I'll go. Maybe I'll go to a hotel, and enjoy my time. But since joining this, or since coming back in full swing with this fandom, it's something that I've absolutely fallen in love with.
Yeah.
Cons now,
Cool.
to me, they're just almost a core tenet of it. It really is. To me, it's something that's almost it's no longer separable to the experience.
Yeah. Um, yeah, now I think we'll start getting into the history of it. And I think, Shakes, you're a good person to start with it because you were there, as you said right at the beginning. Were you someone that was like on the 4chan boards and stuff?
Yes.
Interesting. Because I actually I've got a bit of an attitude that I hate 4chaners. Um, for a
Easy.
variety of reasons, but also I've been bullied by them before online, and it was a pretty horrific experience. But I'll probably get into that when it actually happened in the timeline. So yeah, tell me about how that experience was right at the start.
Well, as a denizen of the internet, I had been a member of 4chan for a while, and someone kind of threw up a flag saying, "Hey, there's this news article that just came out talking about the end of the creator-driven era in TV animation." And it was talking about like how there was this new generation of My Little Pony show being rebooted, which would become Gen 4, and the talking point of the article was like, oh, it's just a 20-minute cartoon commercial to sell toys to kids, which honestly, that's kind of what most cartoons had been like all throughout the 80s, which is where, My Pretty Pony and My Little Pony had come from in the first place. So it really didn't take
Right.
anyone by surprise. So what I and the other troglodytes on 4chan decided we were going to do is that we would all watch the show and then we'd all go onto our forums and rip it apart and make fun of it.
Yep.
That was what we planned to do. So we had a whole
Let's
bunch
make fun
of
of this stupid show.
young adult men who were in their late teens, 20s on these internet forums saying, "Hey, let's all watch this show and then make fun of it super hard." And so we did. We watched the premiere. We watched it live on what was then the Hub. We watched the premiere and we watched it. And I remember having this really weird dissonance where I watched it, and the two-parter. So the pilot was a two-parter. So you watch the first 20 minutes. It ends on a cliffhanger, and it says to be continued. I'm like, okay, well, I have to see the second half in order to make fun of the whole thing. And so then you end up watching the two-parter, and then 40 minutes later you've watched the show with really solid flash animation, really great dialogue, music, and characters. And I remember first meeting the characters like, oh, these are such great caricatures of female stereotypes, and I could just tell all the feminists were going to rip it apart, being like, oh, well, they made Rarity this effeminate character who's just all hoity-toity, cares about dresses and tea parties and junk like that. But in
Yeah,
the
that was
second
definitely
half
the
of the
first impression I got of Rarity, and it took
right.
till a while in before I changed my opinion on her, and she became
Yeah,
second
and
best
then
pony.
and then of course you had Rainbow Dash with the rainbow mane. And it's like, oh, I get it. It's
Right. Right.
she's coded to be a lesbian. The
Yeah,
lesbian
she's the
tomboy there.
tomboy.
Yeah, and then you had the Pinkie Pie as the party girl and the shy Flutter. Obviously Fluttershy, it was in the name, and Applejack, who was also there.
Who was
I'm
there?
just kidding.
Are
I'm just
you
kidding.
sure she was there? She
I
wasn't a
really,
background
no,
pony?
no, no.
Wasn't she a
Hey,
background
hey,
pony?
shots fired, shots fired, but it's all right. I get
I
it.
love
She
Applejack,
is
but
just,
Applejack was the
she is
country
background
the
pony.
country
She is
girl.
best background pony. I
Yeah,
can't get
I
that.
mean, yeah,
And
Applejack's one
but
of my
and
favorites. Yeah, you need a grounded one in the cast, to sort of be the contrast to everyone else. Or
Yeah,
the
and
And
then
other.
of
she
course you
played
had
that role well.
and at the center of all of that, you had Twilight Sparkle, who was your traditional bookish nerdy girl who was kind of an antisocial, and the whole idea of
Would have
the
been my
show,
perfect
Friendship is
woman.
Magic. Yeah, and like the title of the subtitle of the show is Friendship is Magic. So you have this main character who's learning to like, hey, there's more to life than just what's happening in front of your face. Whether that's a book or a handheld device or a TV screen. Like, go out and make friends. And I'm like, okay, that's a practical lesson to teach kids these days with the generation coming up that it was. And so, but anyways, I went back and I watched the show and I'm trying to think like, okay, how do I make fun of this now? So I'm like, all right, let me go back and watch it again.
Did
And
you have like a really cynical attitude? Like, what were you like determined to hate it?
I was trying really hard to hate it, but like the more I watched it, I'm just like, oh, this is going to be awkward because I can't find anything to really make fun of. I'm actually authentically enjoying it. And this was me at like the peak of my cynicism in my life where I just was thinking like, there's no point to, feeling sincere about anything because life is a joke and we're all just going to die to the hungry jaws of capitalism and yada, yada, yada. Like that was the person that I
I mean,
was at the time. And here it
we've
was,
all seen that. Sorry,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt. I was gonna say we've all seen that meme. What's the point of drinking water? Just to piss
yeah.
again?
Yeah, just a bit.
Life is
Yeah.
a
Well,
joke.
but the funny thing was that I was watching a show that just seemed so authentic and sincere and genuine, and it just felt really good to watch it. And even after watching it a second time, I'm like, I can't make fun of this. I actually kind of want to see what happens in the next episode. And so when I went on to 4chan, I'm like, okay, I got to see what other people were saying, right? And there was just like a ton of people saying, damn, this was actually really freaking good, and y'all should watch it and give it a chance. And I'm just like, yes, I became part of that crowd. And someone posted a picture of Spike saying, I run this shit. And, well, no, like he said, like, hey, post a picture of Spike saying, hey, I run this shit. And, um, and I'm like, oh, okay, because you got to remember, memes were just starting to take off, like the meme faces, like all the stuff from like, what
Right,
was it,
right. Well,
cheeseburger.com and all that stuff. Like
I don't
memes were
remember.
just starting to become the currency of the internet. And so I'm like, okay, fine, I'll add some impact font to it. And then he's like, oh, it's perfect. Thanks a lot, Pony Bro. And I'm like, Pony Bro, more like Brony, am I right? And he's like, oh, Jesus, that's too good. I don't want to start using that term, but it's
Oh,
so
come on!
tempting.
You aren't going to tell me that you came up with the term, or someone close to you did.
Yeah, no, I did.
What? Are you
And like
serious?
yeah, but the problem is like because we were talking about Pony, I was logged in as anonymous rather than my handle. So like I don't have any way to prove that, and
Oh,
I don't expect you guys to believe me. I don't expect anyone to believe me. But
I mean, that's
yeah,
fair.
that
I'm hitting that out right now, but the
so
idea. I mean, you're close enough, so you're there. You know what I mean? You're running in the circles that it would have happened in. So I could
and
easily
this is the
believe
thing
that.
too, because like I was not a writer at the time. Like I did not become a writer until I started writing pony fan fiction. But like I already had the talent for it. I just didn't realize it, which is another one of the themes of the show. And so when I came up with the poor mature, pony bro, brony just seemed to fit, and it was lightning in a bottle, right time in the right place, which is kind of a summary for the entire show. Now this was like 15 days after the show had come out. We were talking about it a lot.
And I don't know
So
if you've actually have you watched, I believe it was Saver Sparks video on it. The what's it called? It was I believe it was called the Brony Chronicles. The YouTube documentary that came out not too years and years and years ago. And it was actually, I think it's funny that you mentioned perfect time and perfect place because that's really how the show got its foothold in the first place. It was at the right time and it was at the perfect place because up until that point, from everything that I had heard, everything from I'd been able to see, the internet wasn't quite ready prior to that. If this show had come around, like previous shows, if it had come around just a few years earlier, it's likely that it would have been slept on, and it's likely
it
that
would
it
have
would have
been it would
come
have
back
been two it would have
later.
been 1 or 2 seasons and it would have been done.
Exactly. It would have been slept
Um,
on. People would be like, "Oh, this was pretty good for what it was." But it probably would have ended at season 3, where it said, "Oh, Twilight Sparkle got her wings," where it was originally. Isn't that where it was originally supposed to end
well,
before
I
they realized
think.
how
well,
much money they was able
it,
to
Hang
make?
on.
yeah, I mean it
I'm
wasn't.
just going to say what I heard is that, yeah, basically until the first episode of season 2, um, was before Bronies existed and before they even knew about Bronies. But then the existence of Bronies started influencing the show from, the second episode of season 2. Am I right?
Yeah, that's when you run into that circle of life imitating art, imitating life. Um, but the funny thing too is that
And
because
plus,
it was
John Delancey had no idea about Bronies when he did his, part as Discord.
yeah. So
You remember
part of it being the right time and yeah, part of it being the right time, the right place was just the fact that most people, everyone knows some of the more famous rules of the internet, but one of the more important ones is Rule 19. The more you hate it, the stronger it gets. And we all tried collectively on the internet to hate this show, but it just made it better. And I'm just saying, like, it kind of, I don't know, accidentally made it better. It wasn't actually a direct correlation, but the show ended up being really good.
Yeah,
And then
there was
that
a lot
led
of
to
irony.
yeah, and that led to this little sub community, which wasn't even really a fandom yet. It was just a bunch of people saying, "Hey, this show's actually really good," and there were a bunch of people trying to hate on that because we were being so evangelical about it, like, "Hey, you should watch the show. You should watch the show," and everyone was tired of
Yeah,
hearing about it.
the
And
anti-Bronies.
yeah, and so of course, well, yeah, again, I mean, there wasn't a term for that quite yet, but like, there's always people who are like, "Dude, shut up!" And it's like, no, you forget Rule 19 of the internet. The more you hate it, the stronger it gets. And a lot of people forget that the whole "love and tolerate" phrase that came out of the fandom had nothing to do with sincerely loving and tolerating. It was a counter troll. It was a trolling tactic. It was a counter trolling tactic where you'd have people come in and be like, "Oh, you guys are a bunch of gay people, gay guys who like ponies, right?" And then we'd all just be like, "All right, we're gonna love and tolerate this guy." Like, "Oh, are you lost, little troll? Here's a happy Fluttershy for you." And you wouldn't react. You wouldn't get angry. You would just try to sincerely react as nicely as possible until they get so saccharine sick of it that they remove themselves. And it worked. And so when people say like, "Oh yeah, Pony teaches love and tolerance," no, that's not what that was about. That was a counter troll tactic.
Interesting.
And a lot of people forget that.
Well, that's one of the things that gets lost kind of in the weeds of having the fandom, having it not necessarily be centralized in any. It's centralized around Pony, but there's no necessarily core organization that maintains this kind of thing. There's no record keeping, so things like this, while it's still in the minds of people like you who were there, it's lost on the greater fandom because the greater fandom just sees, for example, love and tolerate. And actually, it's pretty awesome that it's gone to that way because from what it started as to what it became, I mean, it was one of the largest fandoms known for doing specifically, for if I remember correctly, doing charity. It's
Yeah,
one of the fandoms that's most well known for having large charity events, charity auctions, and it's not to say anything about other fandoms, just more so that's a result of whether or not it started as a counter troll, it
yeah,
was taken seriously by people who came after you, who were standing on the shoulders of giants and saying, well, now we see what it was used for maybe, but it's lost on further generations down the line as more and more people joined. They took it seriously in a sense.
I was
And it
there, cash flow. I was there when the strength of trolls failed.
yeah. For me, I'd say like a large reason why I, kind of got passionate about it is because I've had a lot of basically, my mum, every single guy that she dated was a very toxic, masculine asshole, and basically, and also my uncle tried to raise me in martial arts and tried to make me into a toxic, masculine asshole as well. And a lot of this, yeah, is because I used to get punished for showing feminine, feelings or having, feminine interests. Um, and so a lot of this was, out of rebellion against, all those people in my life that made me kind of, yeah, hate that male stereotype and, hate the attitude that might makes right, in terms of physical strength and, and yeah, it was a big rebellion statement for me. And that's kind of why I leaned into it so much. It was part of the reason why, it was more than just a passing interest. And it was like, you know what? I'm going to take this as like a statement of me rebelling against gender, cultural norms.
And that's one of the strengths of the show was that it had such a broad appeal, and it was designed that way from the start. Like Lauren Faust understood I forget who it was that said, I think it was originally Walt Disney that said that if you just make animation, if you just make cartoons or shows, if you just make shows for children, you're losing. You have to make it so that the parents can watch it with the children, because like if the whole point of your show is as a business model just to be a commercial to sell toys, the children don't have toys. They might be the one. The children aren't the one that have the money. They might be the ones asking for the toys. But ultimately, you have to appeal to the adults to spend that money on their kids. And if you can make the show appealing to adults, then adults will buy your things. And
Yeah,
that's also a big part of what powered the fandom was the fact that they made so much. I keep trying to figure out a different word other than swag because I don't want to just start throwing slang around. But
yeah,
they made a lot of really good, high quality merchandise that appealed to all age levels.
yeah.
Well, one
One
thing
other
I
thing
always
is that
say,
I think if my uncle was still alive today, he would be really probably upset that I've ended up this way, and is probably the kind of person who would have stuck his nose up at the whole pony thing and thought it was a really
well,
stupid gay thing.
regardless, I feel like the overall pony has, I guess the best way to put it is, to go back to that Disney quote you said, I went ahead and pulled it up, and he said, I do not make films primarily for children. I make them for the child in all of us, whether we be 6 or 60. And I feel like this, specifically the show,
Oh
was
yeah.
was able to make a chord where it embodied that. Whether obviously it's not by the same family of animators, but they were still able to embody his quote and embody his vision, whether they realized what they were doing or not. And I feel like Lauren Faust is pretty smart. She's made a lot of good shows, and I feel like she did realize what she was trying to do at the time. She
And
was trying
I
to
think a
capture
lot
the
of
fan.
adults have lost that. Like they've lost like they kind of think that everything has to be adult, and if you're watching anything that's like innocent or cute, it's like it you shouldn't be watching it because you're an adult. And I think a lot of that attitude is infected like a lot of people, and so they look down at anything that's not like gory or like especially my mum. She pretty much doesn't want to watch anything that's not some kind of horror. You know.
Well, at the risk of turning this into a mysteries therapy session, um, I would
Don't
say
worry, we'll
that
get into
for
that in the next one in 2011.
the one of the things that was said by Walt Whitman, I believe, was that if it's natural for children to want to be adults, that's a part of growing up. But if you are an adult who focuses on wanting to do only adult things, then that's a sign of really arrested development. And that when you're a adult who's comfortable, with your own self identity, then you can allow yourself to enjoy childish things authentically without worrying about the judgment of other people, because like if you're that worried about everyone's judgment about you, then you're dealing with some very serious personal baggage that you can't really start enjoying life until you let that stuff go. And I think that the fact that so many people were able to authentically enjoy the show is actually a sign that it's really healthy, that they're really healthy for being able to enjoy that on their own terms.
And it's also one of the ways I can help boil it down as well is, in a sense, you're either going to run your emotions or your emotions are going to run you. And that, allowing that time for you to say, hey, I do enjoy these things. It's something that I'm able to control. It's something that I have, how should I say, allotted time to, because, as an adult, you have multiple things that are calling for your attention. You have multiple things that require you have to be a responsible person. And you're going to have multiple things calling to you, unlike when you were a teenager that you had all the free time in the world. And that's what I remember. I had all the free time in the world to just watch Pony. Every once in a while, I'd write a fan fiction, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yeah.
now, moving forward, having responsibilities, having an apartment to pay, having been for example, trying to look for work for two months, it's just something that, for the time, it falls onto the wayside. But you never really forget, because you still make time to go watch the show. You still make time to hang out with your friends or talk pony, or whatever fandom it may be. It's just that it changes and shifts as the responsibilities in your life change and shift. And that's just something that, you come into adulthood, and this is me, I'm still coming into adulthood. It's just something you learn along the way, in a sense. It's learning how to manage, how to juggle both, your your childish desires, along with the realities of being an adult and having those responsibilities you're maintaining.
And I think a big part of the show being lightning in a bottle in terms of what it was and when it was being the right time and place was the fact that the internet was at the point where it was ready for a fandom like this to happen. Because prior to this, if a show like
100%.
this existed, you would have had a bunch of people who could sincerely enjoy the show, but they would be doing it in isolation. And they'd end up, either feeling self-conscious about it or obviously not being able to even tell anyone about
Oh
it,
yeah,
really.
yeah. I knew a lot of people
But
that had to like hide it from their parents and stuff. Like yeah, like a lot of adults, like people that were close to my age at the time, like 26, that they were still
yeah,
needing to hide it from their parents, which was pretty wild.
yeah. And
And
like,
and
I
also
would
some
say,
people that were gay as well. That was an extra thing that they had to hide. And it's like yeah, both gay and brony, and they were terrified of their parents finding out
and
about it.
But so in focusing on the positive though, like if you ever look at like photos of like tropical islands where a volcano erupts and there's all this lava everywhere, but then you see plants starting to grow up out of the lava, the same way with this fandom growing out of 4chan, which was arguably and may still be one of the most toxic places on the internet, is actually kind of miraculous in its own right. But the fact that you had these forums and the fact that Meetup was just really starting to take off, you could have people get together and be like, hey, let's all get together and watch the next episode. And so you'd have people in real life making friends with each other about a show based on making friends. And then that's when you started having stuff like Equestria Daily, which I know we're going to talk about in a future episode. When you started having these centralized places where everyone could share things rather than it being scattered all over the internet, it really let the fandom grow and thrive, and people felt like they could belong and really embrace their love of the show.
Yeah, like
and you also
for
have to
example,
remember,
I was a
if
bit
if I
sorry.
if I can make a point real quick, no
Okay.
worries. So, it goes back to the point that we were talking about earlier, it really did help capture lightning in a bottle to keep the show from being slept on, from being a one or two season kind of show, for example. It came at the perfect time where the internet was big enough, and not just big enough, but being adopted as a mainstream device. The Internet of Things was slowly coming about, and it was being adopted within the main consciousness of not just the United States, but of the world. And that's really what helped this. Because, for example, if I didn't have internet in my room growing up, I would not have been able to. I would have maybe seen this show from a friend's recommendation, and that would have been it. And I would have felt like you were saying, I would have just been watching it by myself in a sense because my
Yeah.
buddy dropped off pretty
Yeah, I
quickly.
mean, for me, like, I was a big fan of Star Trek and Stargate. However, I didn't really have anyone to talk about it with, and so it was just a show that I watched, probably multiple times, and then just yeah, that was it. There was no one to talk to about it. There was no fan content like fan fiction about Stargate or anything like that. So obviously that was a thing that I was passionate about that I couldn't really go very far with because there wasn't other people to do it with. And it wasn't until well, first that guy with the glasses.com that got to have a bit of a community, and that's when I started becoming more, become involved in a community. But then My Little Pony was next, and that really got to skyrocket and got to have me be more involved in it, largely due to the fact that I was actually able to start interacting with
Yeah.
people in real life, not just online, like I had with the other fandoms.
Now, the second part to the reason why the fandom grew so large so quickly is in addition to having centralized spaces where everyone could gather together and share, either the pictures that they were making, the art or literature, memes had become the currency of the internet. And if one of the rules of the internet that grew out of this fandom was that if there is a meme, it will be ponified. And so for several years, it was ubiquitous. Like you couldn't get away from Pony. It was all over the internet, second only to cats. They became the new internet animal, where every forum, even forums that had nothing to do with pony, would end up with having a pony meme in it at
Yeah.
some point because everyone was aware of it. And
Yeah, I mean,
that
I
was
found out about ponies from that guy with the glasses forums. Having this explosion of pony memes all over the place, and that's basically where it started from for me.
yeah,
But I'll get into
You
that
know,
later.
touching
yeah,
up on that, actually. Go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, like the pony memes became like missionaries going into non-pony related places, and then it would pique people's interest, and then draw them in back to those centralized locations. When you had places like cheeseburger.com, which had a lot of them, you had Know Your Meme, and then also, like I said, later on, you had Equestria Daily and things like fanfiction.net.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
But yeah,
for me,
just try not to
one
go
thing that
too
I
far
want
into
to
2011. Try to keep it to 2010 for
one thing
now.
that I want to touch about is, for memes, for example, because memes have been used all throughout history, and there was one meme that I remember being really popular in
All
the
your base.
what?
I said all your base.
The
I belong
original
to us.
digital
Yeah,
meme.
the original meme.
Oh,
Like that.
that one, that one went over my head. I don't remember that one actually.
I saw that one in
The one,
computer class when I was a teenager. Yeah.
Well, I
Anyway,
mean, like I know what cash flow is saying. Like memes have always existed all throughout history. Like in like the classical
right,
sense, like I mean,
Well,
they didn't like Prince John in England, so they started calling toilets Johns. Like that was the meme, but
right,
like not in
and
the way that we
this
think
is
about it in the digital
I
age.
think there's a difference between
exactly,
the
and
Newgrounds memes, like that was the earlier internet where memes were only really on Newgrounds because you couldn't actually put video on the internet yet. It started
Yeah.
off with just flash animations that were low
well,
data.
one example, even going a bit more esoteric and a bit more beyond that is, one thing I remember was Kilroy was here, and that was a famous meme during World War II, actually.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
this is, to me, this just shows, well, it's almost natural in a sense that this is a way that the fandom was created, because what we're looking at here is essentially a much more advanced version, if not even really too advanced, just a
Yeah,
much more volumized version and a much more centralized version of Kilroy was here.
the
That's
the
literally all
social
we're
co-
looking at.
the social concept of a meme is nothing new. The digitized version of it was an inevitability.
Exactly. And what we're looking at now is we're looking at essentially one of these forums and one of these communities that was able to use it and light a fire under their ass to get this. Essentially, it blew up. There's no other way to
Yeah.
describe it other than it completely exploded onto the internet in a way that people just weren't expecting. And, it started off with memes like the anti-troll of love and respect or tolerate and love the shit out of you and whatnot. And I don't think anybody really expected it to blow up to the level that it did and the level that it had. Because I remember during the BronyCon days, I believe that's where it was at its peak. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but
I
what I
will.
remember hearing is that it was at its peak right around the end of the Brony convention. And it sounds like you have a point on that. So go ahead and let me hear it. Lay it on me.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say. I mean, like, I'm trying to think of like which BronyCon you're talking about because if you're talking about BronyCon 2012, like that was like still very much on the rise. I would say just in terms of sheer numbers, it'd probably be about
Hmm
2015. But like it depends.
2017 was their last one, correct?
No, their final episode was 2019.
2019. Okay, then I was off because I was thinking 2017, 2016 era. Towards
Yeah.
the end, or towards what I thought was the end. But if 2019 was the end,
So
then I was thinking more
yeah,
towards
no.
2016, 17.
As much as I hate to say the words out loud, 2017 was probably the beginning of the decline. Like it was done growing, but like that's a whole other conversation.
Right. I mean, it's a natural thing, but
Right,
regardless, it's another
right.
conversation for further down in
Yeah.
this series.
Well, one thing I will keep mentioning is that I get a bit sick. I mean, I've been looking at Facebook a bit too much recently because sometimes I just kind of get bored and I accidentally scroll Facebook and I regret it. But one thing I have been seeing there a lot recently is people thinking that the show should have gone on forever and that G5 never should have happened and stuff. And it's like, I think, shows need to, have, have a certain life cycle or they end up becoming crap like The Simpsons or something like that.
I think
Yeah.
one
Well, I
thing
mean,
that
it's
people aren't looking at is how many shows do you know get the deserved ending that they need or that they should have? How many shows do you know that don't just, end one season because they got failed to renew? And I think that's a bit of perspective that they should keep.
I
You
think
know
we were
what?
very fortunate
Show
at
ended
getting 9 seasons. I mean,
exactly.
that's more than most
Yeah.
shows get.
I would say we're fortunate for getting the ending we did. I thought it was
Yeah.
I wouldn't say perfect ending, but I'd say it's damn near as perfect as you can get for something like this.
I have no notes. But
That's
I
fair.
would say to anyone, like, listen, I had that same sort of like, gee whiz, I wish, kind of feeling of like, oh, I wish
Yeah.
the show could have gone on forever. I wish the show could have gone on forever at the level of quality that it did. Unfortunately, anytime someone says, I wish the show could have gone on forever, I point at Garfield and say, that comic has been going on forever and it has not gotten better.
And you can also look at shows like The Simpsons. The Simpsons is still good. It still pulls in ratings, and they're still trying to find new things. But how many people do you know are actively watching The Simpsons, or would say, oh, it's peaking again, or it's a whole nother revival, or this is the best season yet.
Yeah,
It's one of
The
those situations
Simpsons, The
where the longer
Simpsons
you
has an
go,
audience. I would say The Simpsons has an audience, and The Simpsons functions because it's basically functioning like social commentary at this point, where it's not just about like these sort of like any person's any town America stories of like, oh, I'm getting bullied at school. What a universally
gee
relatable
whiz,
story. Yeah, now it's kind of almost like getting to be kind of like a
it's like
South
South Park
Park.
in
Or
a sense.
There's been a lot of
thank you. It's
family sitcoms. That's what a lot of
yeah,
that yeah,
and
there's
and
been
a
a
lot
lot
of
of
it
them.
just becomes a commentary on the current state of
Like,
the
My Little
society
Pony
that
was a bit
they
more
play in.
original. Sorry, My Little Pony was
Yeah.
a bit more original in that it wasn't just another family sitcom, which
No, exactly. I mean, it also tackled a lot of the same, sort of universally relatable problems, but like it was done in a completely fantastical world. And there was a lot of things. There were a lot of other external factors that we can talk about as to why the show needed to end when it did. Not the least of which
but
being the
we'll get to
discontinuation of
that
Flash
when
animation.
it's
But
relevant.
yeah,
Yeah. So, was there anything else you wanted to say?
well, I was gonna say like the Simpsons. Like I said, the Simpsons have viewers, but Pony had a fandom. Like they had people making. You don't have a ton of people making a lot of Simpsons content that I'm aware of.
Right.
We had so many people who were making animation, who were making music, and people and one, oh, I forgot what else I meant to
And
mention was
is it just
Well, I
me,
mean,
or does it seem like it was a very popular fandom for music videos? You know,
yeah,
PMV.
no,
absolutely.
it
The
definitely
amount
was.
of
And
the
Because yeah,
amount of
yeah,
musical talent that came out of this fandom is crazy. Like there are a lot of artists out there who have gone on to make independent original music that isn't pony related as a result of getting their start and getting their start in the Brony fandom and having enough of that getting enough initial popularity to get them out of the trenches of just first timers,
and one thing that we
Getting
can
that started
attribute
is
this
so
to,
hard.
I think one thing that we could attribute this to is the openness of the community and willingness to accept people from all different strides and fields, because we're essentially looking at an amalgamation of people from all over the spectrum of let's see, socioeconomics. One friend that I had met over at BabsCon recently, they are it was a master's, and he actually he's joined the fandom very recently, I think within the last year or two. And the whole reason he joined was because he decided to do a social thesis on it for his master's. He decided that he wanted to come and study the fandom. He decided that, this is something that if I'm going to get involved in, I need to see what their baseline is, and as a result, he ended up loving the series. He only watched a few episodes of it, but just from those few episodes and coming to conventions and meeting people, that was something that he was able to find solace in. He was able to find, a great deal of enjoyment out of. And then on the other side of that, I have friends who spend all their time on more creative endeavors, let's say, as opposed to the typical 9 to 5, and they make it work in whatever way they can. But we're looking at people who come from all different kinds of backgrounds, and trying to, in a sense, find themselves within this community, and the community is open enough to say, hey, you know what, why not, have at it, make your fan fiction, draw your art, make your music, and we'll give it a listen.
Yeah,
And that's one
and
thing that
all of
I
that.
feel like is very open here.
Yeah, and all of that like springboarding from 2010 was what caused everything that happened after that. to be as amazing as it was, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to talk about the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's straight.
What else can you tell us, Shakes, about the early anti-bronies? And like did you see much about how they formed and sort of their community?
Well, I wouldn't say that there was any sort of organization to them. You know, it's like anything, you know, anything
Like when you get
political
sick of
or
seeing something
online.
on the internet, you're gonna react to it in
Yeah,
a
but like
negative
it's
way.
not. It wasn't like an organized cabal of people getting together to be
Well, there were
anti-bronies. It
like
was
some
just
Facebook groups and stuff that were like, we hate bronies.com and
I mean,
yeah, but
yeah,
you're
but
talking about
they
maybe a few
oh,
dozen people
yeah,
at any
we're not talking
given
about any large organized effort here. There wasn't any large community. Like, I would say even for furries, there isn't too much, anti-furry group, and they're a bigger group of they're a bigger group of people than bronies are.
I mean, you have
There's
to
no
understand.
real organization. It's just
Like
not.
if you look at like BronyCon 2015, okay, that pulled down 15,000 people. Okay, now imagine if only 1% of people could make it to a convention, who could afford the ticket, who had the time, who could go. Imagine if only 1%. Okay, you're still talking about a fandom of like 1.5 million people. All right, now I might
yes.
be highballing it with that.
Well,
Okay, but
so we're not
but
delusional that this fandom is as big as we sort of think it is in our head. Like where we kind of get this inflated ego that yeah, we're in like one of the biggest and fastest growing fandoms ever. Because like I felt like that, and I was like trying to prove it to people, saying
no,
look
it
at how much
absolutely was.
validation
Like
there was
that's
online of this fandom that I'm in, and
yeah,
like
no,
I like to
that's not an
compare us
opinion.
to
That was
like
like a
Star
fact.
Wars. Like I like to compare us to like people who see the Star Wars fandom, and I kind of like to say, oh, I reckon that us bronies are going to be as big as Star Wars for our time in history. And do you reckon we probably were as big as Star
For
Wars
a
for our
time,
time in
absolutely.
history?
Like I would say, because you got to remember, this all happened after the prequel trilogy had come out in the aughts. So the aughts was all about the prequel trilogy. Star Wars fans. Star Wars was probably the biggest fandom at the time. Now, but I will die on this hill saying that the pony fandom at its peak was more active, more cohesive, more productive than any other fandom ever. And I've seen a lot of Star Wars stuff. Okay, I've seen a lot of Star Wars fan fiction. I've seen cosplay, and I've seen like
Yeah,
fan
you
comics
project
and
a lot
art.
of Star Wars fandom in places that you
Yeah,
frequent. Yeah, I've definitely
and but
noticed.
that all of that absolutely pales in comparison to the sheer volume and concentration and quality of the output from the pony fandom.
I
And
would.
now, I mean, obviously, the Star Wars fandom had more staying power, although the current year being what it is, that's up for debate. Uh, I just
And I mean,
not
it did
I don't
start
want
in
to
the
get I don't
70s.
I was gonna say
not to get into it too much.
that would be my only point of pushback is I agree that for the most part we have been much more active, and I don't think there's been I have to agree with you. I don't
And
think there's
there
been
wasn't
another
so much
community that's been
internet
quite
during the
so.
peak of Star Wars either.
Well, what I
Right,
would
but
argue for Star Wars is they had more people in general, but we're also looking at something that was more, I guess you can say, acceptable mainstream, because this was something that still, if you're a young adult and you like Star Wars, that's not unusual. It was kind of made for
right,
you in a sense. So I would
yeah, and
I would
that
push
made
back and
it
just say
that made it
they're
just
more
If you like
it
outgoing.
was
Star Trek,
nothing.
though, if you like Star Trek, then you were the nerd, the weird nerd.
But
No, you know
I
what?
still have to say though, I think
Ma-
that the pony fandom has been the most active in terms of creation. Because I can't find a comparable community that has quite so many space for forums, quite so many space to post pictures, quite so many space to organize in a sense.
Yeah.
It is, I
and to
would
just
have to
kind
say
of
you're right on that part. You're
and to
100%
just kind
correct
of
on
take
that.
a step back here for just a moment, like when you talk about like nerd culture or geek culture, like the fact that like you don't have just picking on the nerds in high school, like the classic high school drama there, is because largely because of how businesses have grown up around computers now. 20 years ago, you wouldn't want to be a geek or a nerd, but like now, it's like these are the people who are pulling down the huge salaries.
Mm.
These are the people who suddenly become attractive to someone who's attracted to somebody for money,
Yeah,
and instead of it,
I kind of
yeah,
wonder if
instead
I
of
was
it,
going through high school now, I'd probably be, one of the cool kids compared to, when I was actually in high
let's
school.
not kid ourselves, mystery, okay?
Oh, okay.
But
Well,
the
I
point
liked
is,
I liked
like,
comics and superheroes then, and now everyone loves superheroes. Yeah,
right. But
superheroes are
now
mainstream.
But
right,
now
but
the
instead
difference
of the
is
trope of the cheerleader, going to prom with the football star who's going to go pro and be an NFL player, like now it's like now they're hedging their bets, like, hey, this person is already C++ certified, and they're going to be a programmer, or they're going to be whatever someday. Like that's a much more marketable, attractive skill if you're looking for a partner for that reason. And
I
I
mean, come
think
on,
that's
let's be
yeah.
honest. In
And
high
so
school, the
the
kids aren't
whole the
thinking
fact that
about
you
that. They
have
are thinking about that.
yeah. And the fact that the internet is its own microcosm, like the people who engage with the internet the most are going to be the people who are of the geek and nerd culture. So it's just kind of all of us kind of patting each other on the back saying, hey, look how cool we are. I made a meme.
Well, I mean, you could also look at it the way the whole reason that the Silicon Revolution was even able to come about was because it was in a sense nerd culture. It was a culture that was very underreported. Not too many people knew about it, and in a sense, it was able to go about for the longest time without any sort of regulation, allowing people to just kind of Wild West it.
Yeah,
And that's what we
Yeah.
saw in
And
the early 2010s. It was the Wild West of the internet. And slowly we saw government catch up and start putting regulations in. But for not the longest time, for the shortest amount of time, it was almost like total freedom on the internet.
yeah. I
Nuts.
actually,
well,
sorry, just quickly. I actually, yeah, because I was nostalgic for, I guess, history about around when I was born, I started watching the first season of Neighbours, and in literally the first episode of Neighbours, they make reference to computers arriving in a bank that this guy works at, and so yeah, the start of Neighbours is literally the start of the very first time computers start being introduced into businesses, and I thought that was like an interesting because that was 1984 was the first episode of Neighbours, and when they first started mentioning computers.
yeah. So, like, there are kids now who are growing up who have never seen a phone booth or a payphone, and they're growing up with computers, they're growing up with smartphones in their hands.
Or a
Like, I didn't have
VHS. They've never
right.
seen a
Like
VHS.
I didn't even own a clamshell cell phone until I was already in college. I had gotten along just fine before all that without any of this technology, like before MapQuest even, getting around and traveling. So like that's a big aspect of it too. But like yes, a bunch of very uncool nerds back in the '80s made a very cool thing that became a very cool place.
Yeah, and I would honestly, I'd say that's a pretty good assessment of it. Because I don't think anybody really expected it to bloom to the point where it has. But you know what? C'est la vie. Hell yeah, I love it. I think we can all agree we love it.
Oh yeah, and I'll continue to love it.
I think we all will.
Bringing
Like,
bringing
I
it
mean,
back to
do you think
bringing back to
there's any possibility of us escaping from the fandom at this point, leaving the cult?
Well,
get it? Leaving the cult.
Well, what I will mention
I-
is that I did try to leave for 3 years, but we'll get into that when we get to those years.
Well, for better or worse, I would compare the pony fandom to a drug. You try it once,
Yeah.
and you get hooked, and it takes quite a little bit of willpower or circumstance to get you to quit. And but like an actual addiction, I tell people, you can't get somebody to quit unless that person wants to quit, and I'm not quitting anytime soon.
I would argue it's like League without the rage. And even then, if you go to the right circles, you'll still get the rage. It's digital crack. At the end of the day, that's kind of how it is. It's so much fun. Sometimes honestly, it's like digital crack, and you don't even get the burnout from it. That's the best part. Well, sometimes you'll get burnout, but not necessarily from Pony itself.
Yeah, well, just like with the comparison to League, like when you get any large group of people, you're going to have, the 1% at either end of the spectrum who are going to be the vocal minority shouting this side or that side, and you get the other 98% of the people in the middle just saying, shut up, we just want to enjoy the thing.
Hey, I just had an idea. Cash, did you want to try typing in YouTube PMBs 2010? See if we can get like a list of, some of the Brony content that actually happened in that year.
I can't think of a lot, but a lot of them I think would be what the heck are those? So the animated text there, where they animate the lyrics.
I know which one I'm talking about, but the name's eluding me at the moment.
Yeah, but I think one of the biggest tragedies in this fandom, considering that people say that when it's on the internet it's there forever, and and I know there are some repositories somewhere where stuff gets saved, but I know that there is a lot of pony content, especially from the early days from 2010, that is it's gone and may never be found again. Like the thing I really hate is when someone leaves the fandom and then they delete everything they ever had without warning. It's like, hey man, let somebody archive that stuff. If you don't want it to be attached to your name anymore, it doesn't have to be. But like, there are still people who enjoy this, and there are so many songs there. I used to have folders in my bookmark bar that would just be full of PMVs that I really liked, and I'd go through them one day and I start clicking on it and be like, this video is no longer here. This video's been deleted. This channel is now private. I'm like, it's all gone. It's going.
Actually, that reminds me to ask you: are you in a Zizzy chat, Shakes?
Probably.
Okay, because that's their deal. Like, they do archivals.
Oh yeah. No, I did enjoy that. Yes.
Okay, good. Because if not, I was going to invite you there because, there's a lot of information there, a lot of wealth of older things, older PMVs, older nostalgia that I think you would just get a kick out of.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's another thing that's very unique to this fandom is that there are people who are expending serious amounts of effort to preserve it, because we were very fortunate to know as it was happening just how special it was, just how much of a lightning in a bottle that it was, and we could enjoy it as much as possible as it was happening. Because there's sometimes when something happens and you don't realize how special it was until it's gone. And we were very fortunate. I was very lucky for the many years that I have been in the fandom to know just how special it's been right from the beginning. Like, I remember finishing watching that second episode of the pilot. That very first time, I'm just like, okay, this is something special. Like, I couldn't articulate why at the time, but I just felt it in my heart, and it was true, and it's been true ever since.
Yeah, for me, I'd say it was as soon as I watched episode 4 that I decided I loved it. But yeah, we'll get into that next time.
I feel like I guess we'll get into that next time as well, like how we got into it, because I know I just hopped on a random episode. I just decided, my buddy was telling me about it. He said it was really good, and I said, it's good. I'm not even gonna watch the two-parter to start off. I think I start off with Dragon Shy.
Oh, dude, is this did you want to bring that up, Cash? It looks like Shakes might have found evidence that he invented Brony.
Oh, I see it.
Oh no, it is the quotation from when that had happened, but it's not any evidence that I'm the one who invented it.
Right.
I just have the screenshot from it.
You have the screenshot from when it was first said.
Cool. So imagine if we were Pony Bros this whole time instead. Like, imagine a whole different alternate timeline.
That could have actually. I would argue that could have actually killed the fandom.
No.
The naming convention is important. It's the reason why companies fight for things like Coca-Cola, or the naming convention of being able to say it in a way that's memorable, easy, and rolls off the tongue. It does have a really big impact on not just your sales, but how you're perceived. If we were called Pony Bros, I feel like it would have been too cringy.
I refuse to take that much credit. But I will say, for example, that you can make your own Brony convention, but you can't call it BronyCon because BronyCon has been trademarked, and that no longer happens anymore unless someone wants to license it. But I don't think anyone will.
Well, not after the last one, unfortunately. But that's a story for another time.
That's a story for the 2019 episode.
Yes, sir. Well, I feel like we've said a good amount about 2010.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel? You have anything else to add?
I mean, we can go through the list and see. I think we've kind of touched on pretty much everything in the list.
Honestly, there wasn't a whole lot that happened that was particularly exciting in 2010, aside from the inception of the fandom, because at that point we were still very scattered and isolated. And we didn't like all the stuff that I was talking about having a centralized place, about
This
the
comes
memes
later.
really
Yeah, I mean,
proliferating. That all comes later on.
like I don't. Yeah, film fiction didn't exist yet. I'm pretty sure that it didn't exist until a little bit after I joined, because I remember I started off reading pony fiction on fanfiction.net at first, and it took a while before that even that site, the
And you know,
filmfiction.net site, came out.
I guess some final comments I have on this, on more so, bringing up the point earlier we were talking about. It's pretty interesting to see the amount of effort that people will go through in this fandom to like preserve things like this. And to me, it speaks more to a slow centralization of not just information, but in a sense, it almost feels like it's getting to a point where we're going to have something that represents the fandom as a whole. I feel like right now the closest thing we would have is almost like film fiction in a sense, because a good amount of bronies know what that is, and that's where the biggest form of that's where the biggest place to get your fan fiction is. So I feel like that would be right now the most centralized place, with another competing organization being Equestria Daily. But I feel like what we're going to slowly see is the merger of essentially a new player, either a new player come out or one of these two take over the other to become the new centralized hub. Because it's not that it's not that one, it's no longer growing, or if it is, it's nowhere near the same rate that it used to. But we still have a dedicated fandom. There's still dedication to it, and that's really what drives these things. That's really what drives, uh, not necessarily change, but that's what drives organizations is dedication and loyalty to it. And I feel like that's what we're moving towards.
Yeah. So, I'm gonna disagree with you on one point, though. I don't think that fan fiction or Equestria Daily really want to have anything to do with each other. They're both separate entities. They exist for very different
Yeah,
reasons.
I've always kind of felt like they're they're their own clubs, and that they like I always kind of felt like Equestria Daily is like its own club of people that know each other, and they don't really want to let others in.
I don't. I'm gonna disagree with that too. And let me just finish here, okay? Like they both the both sites serve very different purposes. They both have their reasons to exist. Although I'm getting the feeling, and I could be totally wrong here, but I'm starting to feel like Equestria Daily is starting to become less relevant, since there isn't like enough new daily content to justify the title of it.
Right.
Whereas like with fanfiction.net, like you've got content being generated there every hour. And plus, I just between the two, I find fanfiction.net to be a lot better structured in terms of navigation and whatnot, whereas Equestria Daily really is kind of like a message board or a blog for daily occurrences.
And
And
don't think that. Sorry, you were saying? Didn't mean to cut you off.
yeah, I kind of get the sense that that well is starting to dry up, because that requires a lot of work on the user side to submit content, because then it's not as easy for the Equestria Daily staff to go out there and find things that are happening, because like it's not in the news anymore, and it's not
It's no longer the thing, the now thing in a sense.
Yeah. Whereas like fanfiction.net is even if the show becomes completely irrelevant, the fanfiction.net community is kind of like self-perpetuating, because there's a lot of people who just build off of each other rather than the show directly anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that one heavily. I would agree with you because that one essentially is becoming its own beast. And don't think when I say, they merge together, this necessarily mean that they want to or one of them wants to. It could always just end up being, well, I guess in my head I was thinking more so one of them has something the other one could utilize, therefore they expend a little bit of muscle, whether it be monetarily, politically, however they're able to do it. That's more so what I was thinking, but I have to agree with you that I think that for me, Equestria Daily has never been necessarily the most relevant thing. I guess you could say.
It absolutely was. It absolutely was
It
for a
was.
time.
I meant more so in my experience.
Yeah.
But I know you're right in that
It was
it
definitely
one of
like
the
very important at the
common places
start.
to get your pony information.
Yeah,
It
like
was one of the
while
first
the
places
show,
they got off 4chan, wasn't it?
yeah, so while the show was on the air, that was the place to go. Like that was where you would go to see the latest fan art, to see the latest music, rather than digging through YouTube, like you'd go there and you'd have links to everything, all the fan art, the music, and then you'd have links to streams that would be airing the show live. If you didn't have the network on your TV package, you could go there and watch the show. Like that was the place to know what was happening today. And unfortunately, like I said, it's just kind of falling out of relevance now. And like the purpose for it to exist, like, is what's going to end up happening. I feel is that fanfiction can perpetuate indefinitely because, like, obviously they got ad revenue, they've got Patreon subscribers, or actually no, these subscribers are now, but they've got that, so they can perpetuate indefinitely. Whereas I fear that Equestrian Daily is just eventually just going to say, "Hey guys, we had a good run, but at this point, it's no longer worth our time or effort or money to maintain the site," and then they'll either archive it or just close it down.
Mhm.
Or it may just continue to limp on forever, but just become like Equestria Weekly or Equestria whatever. But I mean, like G5 was kind of like Equestria Daily's last best hope to stay relevant in terms of like, hey, here's the latest and greatest. But like G5 kind of didn't really do what some people were hoping it would. It's tough. G4 is a tough act to follow, but again, this is a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Yeah,
we'll see.
I did have. I mean, if you guys are finished, I did have a question for each of you at the end when we're ending. So, if you guys are finished,
yeah.
yep. All right. I want to know, each of you, what at the end of season 1, what was your favorite episode so far? Just season 1, and what was your favorite pony? What was your favorite episode?
Cash. Cash, you want to take this one first?
I'd say I'd let you take this one first. It's been so long since
All
I've
right.
seen season 1. If I'm being honest, I only watched the series once.
All right, so season 1, my favorite episode for the longest time was the Sonic Rainboom.
Right. Yeah.
But
That's
I also really liked Bridal Gossip with where we meet Sakura for the first time. I'll tell you what though, I go back and I watch Sonic Rainboom, and I still get goosebumps every time. Every time I watch that episode. I know how it's going to end, but it's like watching the losers where you're like, oh god, are they going to win? Are they going to lose the championship? Like, you've seen this movie 100 times, Every time I watch the episode, when at the very end there, at the climax where Rainbow Dash is diving down to save Rarity, like, I get chills every time.
All right. And who's your favorite pony? Particularly at that time, do you reckon?
At the time of season 1 was absolutely Rainbow Dash.
Right. Yep.
So
okay.
I think for me,
yeah. All right. You go, Cash.
I'd say the Cutie. I think the Cutie Mark Chronicles. I think that would be have to be my favorite from the first season, and the reason for it is because I loved seeing how everybody got their Cutie Marks, and I think that was really what drove it for me. Is it gave me more of a connection to all these characters that I had just spent. Let's say, where's Dragon Shy? It is over in like episode 5, episode 7. So these last 14 episodes that I've been watching kind of put all that into more context and gave me a reason, in a sense, to care for these characters. And I have to say, at the time, my favorite character was definitely Applejack, and the reason for it was I had Green Thumb for the longest time. I actually thought I was going to be a rancher growing up because, one, I had Green Thumb, I worked well with animals, and I really did have an interest in pursuing the agricultural field because I really valued self-sufficiency at the time. And I still do, mind you, but in a separate sense, in a different sense. So I really admired Applejack's work ethic. I really admired the way her lifestyle, in a sense. I was almost like Trenderhoof. Not to bring in later seasons, but that's really one thing that I would say it made Applejack my favorite character, as well as even influenced me as a person, as an adult.
Yeah.
I need to change my answer. I went back and looked at the episode list.
Okay.
That's exactly what I did.
All right, so I saw Ghostbusters, which is where Trixie makes her first appearance.
Yeah.
And while Ghostbusters is not my favorite episode,
I definitely hated Trixie.
Trixie was definitely my favorite character. And here's the fact. I like Trixie a lot because
I think one of the main
this is-
reasons is because I had a friend who
let him-
absolutely
let him-
adored Trixie, and I found them annoying.
Let him finish his point. Let him finish his
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, nobody likes Snips and Snails. You're not supposed to. But so the reason why I liked Trixie, okay, and then you gotta remember this was back in 2010, and Shakespearicles did not come to exist until like 2012.
Yeah, we keep saying a name wrong. It's the Great and Powerful Trixie, of course.
Yes. So, but well, I'm used to interacting with the later seasons of her now. But gosh, like she was like the Boba Fett of the series at that point, okay? Because she had one appearance, she was super cool, and then she disappeared. Like, and I'm not saying like she did anything cool because obviously she was magically inept at that time, but like her whole character, her presentation, her appearance, all of it was super cool. And like again, Boba Fett in Return of the Jedi didn't do anything cool other than fall into a pit of Sarlacc, all right? But like he was such a mysterious character. Like, oh man, their backstory could be anything. What ended up happening after we last see them, it could be anything. And it was such a wellspring of like story ideas for fan fiction. And even though Ghostbusters was not my favorite episode, it still very much is Sonic Rainbow. Trixie was my favorite character because uncompromising people are easy to admire, and she was a big influence for when I created my character of Shakespearicles to be my avatar and my whole persona, was to have this really over the top, self confidence that was at the
World's
time wasn't
strongest writer.
justified on anything. Yeah, exactly. And it was based largely on that because Trixie was such an appealing character because they have this uncompromising self confidence that you can't help but admire.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
And, I would actually have to agree with you on that one because, when I first watched, it's not that I necessarily liked Trixie, but, I have to agree. There was a certain, it's a bravado in a sense, it's carrying, she carried herself as though she was 100% no matter what. And, there's confidence to that. And that actually, I would say, also kind of, in a sense, gave me that little flick. It gave me that little direction of myself, having that bit of, not unending confidence, but having higher levels than I'd say the normal person is just part of that I would say also came from Ghostbusters. Is I thought it was a fun episode. It was one of I wouldn't say it's my favorite episode, but it was definitely one that I happily would go back to and watch. And thinking about it more and more, it's like, Trixie really was a fun character. Just listening to you describe her, it really does bring back almost nostalgic feelings for, hey, I remember this. I kind of want to go back and see it now myself.
Yeah, and that's how I've always portrayed Shakespearicles as just this incredibly confident character, despite glaring flaws that I make no attempt to try to rectify. And that way people can say, like, oh well, I could be better than the great and powerful Shakespearicles, and that's great. Like that was the whole point. Like I play this character ironically, so people will strive to be better than this person who thinks so highly of themselves. And let me tell you, this is just a preview for the 2012 episode. When Magic Duel came out in 2012, I nearly did a goddamn backflip when Trixie came back.
Looking forward to hearing that in the future.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll now tell you mine. It is Suited for Success because that was the episode that completely turned around my opinion on Rarity. Up until that point, I absolutely despised Rarity. I thought she was totally that whole, stereotype of the girly girl, fashionista. But it was that episode that made me realize that she's probably one of the characters that I relate to the most in terms that she's the creative type. She's that character, and so it really got to me and made me decide that Rarity was the second best pony after that.
Yeah, Suited for Success really was an episode written for anyone who was the creative type because they've been in that position before where you have these. Yeah.
And then there's also the Dog and Pony show because that's where it showed Rarity kicking butt and not needing to be rescued. That was a really fun twist of that episode. And then of course there's the Applebuck season, which was the first episode where I decided that I loved the show. Maybe because I did it chronologically, so it was pretty early in, but it's still one of my favorite episodes in terms of just showing Applejack being awesome Applejack, and I think it's still one of the best ways that they've portrayed Applejack overall. So yeah, thank you for your insight on that. And yeah, I guess I will see you next time to talk about 2011. Now I'm debating whether or not to do 2 episodes because it's such a big year and it's like the main year. But yeah, I guess we'll see.
We'll see how long it runs.
We got the depends on the timing.
All right. Well,
All right.
thank you for
Well,
joining me,
yeah.
guys, and I'll see you next time.
See you next time.
It was great talking to you all.